Action.
What's shaking Bridge 4? No, that did not work.
We're committed now.
Now. No, we're not committed now. Start it one more time. One more time. I promise. Hey, guys. Good to see you. How you doing?
Good.
Great.
I was hoping you're going to escalate it like good, great, fantastic kind of. Thanks for hanging out with. Yeah, we are, to say the least.
Fantastic.
Thanks for hanging out with us and spending this time together. My name is Rob. The one who keeps interrupting me is Brad. Luke and Jonathan round us off. And we are the World Singers. Unofficially. I think maybe we might get sued if we were official in that. But what this is meant to be a conversation amongst friends who happen to be theologians, who happen to also love the works of Brandon Sanderson, and particularly in the works that take place in the same fictional universe he created called the Cosmere. And so we are going to be taking some of his works. We're just going to start by going through the Stormlight Archive, and we're going to break it down just kind of into the natural sections that it breaks itself into, and then have conversations and record them and just put them out there in case there's anyone else who is simultaneously nerdy about Brandon Sanderson and theology. That's kind of where we are, I think, but not limited to either one of those things. I would think maybe if you're here on this channel, it's because you're interested in at least Sanderson. Right. But we do want to put that out there who we are. We are all of us, some form of minister or spiritual care provider by occupation. We're friends, we all know each other, and we all are really, really nerdy about Sanderson and like what we get out of it. So here, just to wrap up my introduction speech, what we are going to be doing is going through and just having conversations where kind of for each part or section, each one of us is going to bring one thought or idea just to open up a conversation and to talk about. And this may be very clearly beyond author intent as far as where we take it and the applications that we take out of it. We're not trying to do a literary analysis saying that this is what Sanderson intended. We are instead doing what any fan of any piece of art has the freedom to do, which is to apply it to our own lives and situations. And that's what we're doing with it. And we love having the conversations together, so we thought maybe we would share them with the world. Yeah. There we go. What do you guys think?
Because we're really humble and we just feel like what we have to say the whole world needs to hear. So, no, not really. Yeah.
That's way better than when we did our trial runs a couple weeks ago, the things that were coming out of your mouth. So I'm very grateful, Jonathan.
100%. Yeah. So I'm just gonna get the ball rolling here.
Let's do it.
So it doesn't need to be said, but this is full spoiler alert territory. So if you, for whatever reason, haven't read the books, just know we're not holding anything back. So in the beginning,
and that goes. Sorry, the spoiler-ness will. We just want to say it from the beginning, and we'll probably say it every episode. It's going to be Cosmere level spoiler. Right. We'll try to keep our conversation mostly in the Stormlight Archive, but there may be connections and things that come to all of it. And we all have read, not necessarily all of us have read all of the Cosmere, but between us we have covered it and over covered it, in some ways. So yeah, our conversation goes outside of these books even. So if you're not wanting to be spoiled anywhere in the Cosmere, read it all tonight, and then tomorrow you can watch this video.
Wait, have we said yet what specifically we're going to be talking about today? Like what part of the Stormlight Archives we're going to be talking about?
Oh, no.
We should probably let people know that we're focusing on, just for this video, we're focusing on the Prelude, Prologue, and Part 1.
Okay, so basically the first fifth of the book.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
For me, the thing that I want to kind of raised to just kind of have a conversation with you guys is comes out of the Prelude, which a couple of weeks ago when we kind of first started thinking about this journey, we had a conversation. I believe it was Brad who pointed out that technically this is not the prelude to the Way of Kings, but technically it's the prelude to the Stormlight Archives, which I had not noticed. But I guess Sanderson is intending to set something up, obviously, for the series of, projected series of 10 books or so. And it's really interesting to me because the whole story starts kind of with an anticlimactic failure. You're kind of given enough information to figure that out. Kelek in the beginning, you kind of later on learn that he's one of the heralds, but it's kind of through his perspective, through his eyes, and he's on this battlefield. There are all these different, creatures that have been slain, and all this stuff is going on, and he kind of arrives at this circle of swords, and Jezreel, who we discover is kind of like the kind of leader king of the heralds, basically has a conversation with him about just quitting, like just giving up, just breaking their oath pact, leaving one of their number kind of to deal with the consequences of that, and just walking away because they're just so beaten down and broken from the cycles of trying to save Russia from these desolations and kind of always seemingly coming to this point of failure. And for me, it's just a really interesting way to start out a series of books that are going to be ultimately about heroes and, victories and all of that, with the massive, you could say, failure, or certainly with a lack of strength. And it sets a very interesting tone for the rest of the series. So that's the thing that I want to throw out there for conversation and whatnot.
Yeah, and even compared to last week when we had a conversation that was just about the prologue and prelude, I personally felt like I just noticed that more, since we had kind of already brought that up a little bit about how much the characters, like our focal characters, how broken they are, and how much it goes to show that. Like Shallan, it doesn't show it as much. It's more subtext and lines that you don't pick up on maybe on your first read on their significance, but she definitely is a super broken person. Kaladin, obviously, super broken. By the time you get around to him rolling through the, rolling towards the Shattered Plains in the slave cart, he's pretty broken. And then Seth, like taking like your prologue and focusing in on this person who is doing horrific things because they are broken to the point of believing they don't even have their own will anymore and can't even choose to not do it. It's just, I zeroed in on that a little bit more because of your mentioning that about how we're starting by focusing on some really, really broken people.
I've recently been rereading the third book in the series, Oathbringer, and I'm realizing how I think it's brilliant of Sanderson to sort of set things up the way he does with these broken characters, because as those characters develop, it kind of magnifies the things that they in the end do because of the gap between where they start and where they end up. And so I don't know if he put that there just as sort of like a literary device, or he's trying to make a bigger point about the idea of brokenness, and maybe, true heroism doesn't come out of perfect people with all these powers, but comes out of broken people doing, going beyond what they should be capable of. But it really works in the story. It creates quite a lot of pathos when you see a character and you know where they've come from, and then you see them like doing these amazing things. It's like, well, you just find yourself cheering for them, Yeah. Any thoughts, Luke?
I'm gonna get more into, I guess, like Kaladin's brokenness, but yeah, that's something that has really stood out to me more as well. Like you said, especially as you get into the rest of the books, you realize that this is a recurring theme, that it's not just, you know, something that he focuses in on in the prelude and the prologue of Way of Kings, but like every character pretty much has pretty much hit rock bottom, and it's which is fascinating to me, because I should have had this quote ready to go, but there's a place in, let's see, what chapter is that? The where it's like a flashback to Kaladin's childhood, and he's with his dad, and they're talking about the radiance, which, you know, we know, spoiler alert, Kaladin is going to become a radiant, right? And Kaladin refers to them as demons, right? And his dad says they weren't demons, they were just men with too much. Do you have that quote, Brad?
It's page 152.
Yeah. Yeah, but I love that, you know, they weren't demons, they were just men with too much power and not enough sense, you know. And I think that, in a sense, all of these characters, we actually find out that these people who are going to become Radiants, the new Radiants, were people with no power, and who were just trying to do what was right, you know, to the best of their ability. So anyways, it's just, I love those moments where Sanderson kind of paints one picture of, he kind of creates an expectation, and then he kind of completely flips it.
And we will have more moments like that for sure. Similar to this, one of the quotations that I underlined specifically this read through was in Shallan's first chapter. And I'm just getting there myself. It's actually on the first page of her first chapter, on page 61, where she talks about how she'd expected to spend her life locked away, never expected to be doing what she was doing, like coming on Carbranth and seeing the City of Bells and all that. But then there's this one sentence, or this 2-sentence paragraph that comes right after that, where she says, "But expectations were like fine pottery. The harder you held them, the more likely they were to crack." Which is an interesting metaphor in a sense, but also knowing the greater theme of these stories is dealing with cracked human beings, like whose souls have cracked so that they have openings and fissures in them to be able to bond with these Spren, right? I feel like that's not just a throwaway line. Like there's something in this idea of, in a sense, where all of these people cracked because they were held too tightly by something or someone.
Yeah, I think, you know, Kaladin is obviously, to your point, Rob, kind of the character here in part 1 that we finally see connecting with a Spren for the first time in Syl. And you know, what you're saying, it kind of reminds me of oh my goodness, now I'm forgetting where the quote's from, but where the saying that, like, you can't be brave without experiencing fear. Why am I forgetting where that's from? Anyway, there's almost a sense to, like, Syl sees honor in Kaladin, not because he is perfectly honorable, but because he has experienced the absolute opposite of that. And it's almost like the contrast between fear and bravery, between honor and I don't know what the opposite of it for Kaladin. It seems to be, you know, just sort of listlessness. It seems like almost the contrast between those two extremes is, which is really brokenness, is something that is deeply important to the story as a whole, right? You know, Shalyn, for example, is interested in, is interested in light, and yet so much of herself is in shadow. And like the contrast of brokenness seems to be vital to the story.
Yeah, that is. I don't know if this is necessarily how we planned to do this, but this is just I feel like such a perfect like place to transition and not necessarily end what you're talking about, but add in what I brought as my thing, which I did mention to some degree last time we talked, and you guys are familiar with me at least beginning this conversation, but I wanted to go a little further with it, and that is, it's Cosmere level. I like to look at big picture, and I like to look at kind of what's going on here. And within the greater story of this Cosmere, what you have is a godlike character that's called Adonasium. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but it's something close to that. Who was betrayed / attacked / defeated, whatever you would want to call it, or however it happened, and broken into 16 shards or parts, right? And then these different shards, basically these slivers of the power or essence of who this god was, kind of went these different directions. And some of Brandon Sanderson's planets and worlds that he creates, one of the shard might go there, or 2 or 3. And so you have essentially these elements of what makes God God, that new creatures or beings grab a hold of that power and then become identified with that. And they lead as a godlike character, but they are very exclusive in being only this part of what God is like. So for instance, you have on Cell, I believe, is the planet that Mistborn takes place in. You have Ruin and Preservation are the two shards that are there. And within the cultures that are on Cell, and just the way the culture of the whole world works and everything, you can see their impact huge. And the decisions that are made, the theology, everything that's been done has really been made with those aspects in mind. And then you get to Roshar, which is where the Stormlight Archives take place. The book that we're looking at is here on this planet. And you basically have 3 shards that are influencing or have had influence on this planet. You have Odium, Honor, and Cultivation. And I feel like there's something big behind that, just as kind of like the behind the scenes, like this is the message that is being portrayed by these stories, which is, look what happens when you only focus on certain aspects of God and don't keep God in balance. That if your culture, if your religion, if your being, if your everything is like, if you're just purely about passion, which is what Honor is at his core, that's what he really is, or not Honor, Odium. Like passion isn't a bad thing when passion is checked by honor and checked by all the other things that balance it out. But when you get just pure passion, it becomes something odious. Passion unchecked by honor. And so I feel like that's a theme that's going on behind all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I feel like that has been coloring, as in this is probably my 7th or 8th read through right now. It's coloring the way that I see the story and the characters and everything going on. Is like, wow, this is a world that is really, it thinks it's about honor. Like it really holds honor up as a phantom value, but honor is actually kind of dead in the culture. Yeah. To the point where
and
Kaladin
literally dead.
Super stands out. Yeah, and literally dead. Kaladin is a real outlier because he's acting with honor. Dalinar becomes a real outlier really quick because he's an honorable person, or at least is being driven that way by reading The Way of Kings. And yet you also see like the idea of cultivation seems really strong behind Vorinism, and the idea of like crafting your own calling to rise up and like be the best version of yourself you could be, to grow, and then be able to go to the Tranquiline Halls and join in the battle. Like it seems to have like these 3 values that are everywhere and all encompassing, but it's that tension between them, and it's really the problem that all of them bring to the table when they're not held in check that is behind this entire story.
Yeah, and what's interesting for me about that is how we see echoes of that in the world, in the real world, in terms of where people take slithers of things, whether that be religiously or even politically. And when you take something that in itself maybe is good, but then you push it all the way to its extremes, it becomes bad, and often bad in an unexpected way. So coming back to the story, the idea of Honor being dead, you have Zeth's character, who technically is like such a stickler to his oaths, but in being honorable and keeping his word, he is doing these terrible things.
Which I'd never put that together, but that's actually something that comes out in Dalinar's conversation with Odium in book 3, where Odium is telling him about how, like, look, honor could be terrible. Like, look what would happen if you had honor that was just such a stickler for honor, just like Justice, the Herald of Justice, became such a bad dude because his justice had no wisdom or mercy in it.
Yes. And so there's and you have the echoes there in the Alethi culture, and there are hints of it obviously later on in Dalinar's relationship with his wife. They're very stoic. They don't show they don't show a lot of emotion. They don't show a lot of passion, especially in public. So there are these, like you're saying, Rob, there are these hints of these extremes, and I think that one of the things that Sanderson is trying to say, as you're pointing out, is that anytime you take one piece of, let's say, God, and you hold on to that to the exclusion of something else, it creates conflict. It creates, ultimately, in this case, literally, shard blades, literally war between these different pieces of what was originally the same being. And so, for me, at least when you get into the second and into the third book, you're left kind of uncertain as to who the good guys and the bad guys are anymore. It's this weird kind of in-between space, which makes for good reading, but awkward philosophy.
Brad,
it reminds me. No, go ahead.
Well, I felt like there was also kind of a window here as we're merging maybe all of our topics together, because I know, Brad, what you had talked about bringing to the conversation today. Was that you, Luke? I'm sorry, I might have got those backwards. I know one of you said you were going to talk about Vornism.
That was Brad.
That was you, Brad. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I said offline that I think Vornism is one of the most interesting, like, fantasy religions that I've ever really, like, read in a fantasy novel. Like, it's really fleshed out. It's so deeply integrated into the culture that it kind of bubbles up in all of these different ways, and
what
Sanders,
food you eat, safe hands,
right?
What women and men are allowed to study.
Absolutely. It's
burning
really,
prayers. Yeah, it's everywhere.
Really unique, but also deeply integrated, and to the point that, like, most of the characters, certainly the characters that we spend most of our time with in Shallan, Kaladin, and going forward, Dalinar and Adolin and so forth, like, they are Vorin. And so we don't get a whole lot of exposition telling us about Vorinism, because all the characters we spend time with, like, it is deeply, it is assumed that they know all these things, which really kind of, in some ways, kind of helps tell the story of Vorinism. But it's
and you don't feel it as much. I'm just realizing as you're saying this, you don't feel it as much until a character is put in the midst of them who isn't Vorin. Sure. Like, as soon as you throw Rock or I had others in mind, but, like, as soon as you throw a character in the mix, who isn't Vorin or doesn't hold to that ideology, all of a sudden you can feel the clash.
Right. And,
like,
so I found it interesting on a couple of levels. Wanted to kind of see what your thoughts were about Vorinism. For me, it's actually probably the first thing that jumped out to me about the novels as a whole when I first read them, 10 years ago, because one of these deeply held things for the Vorens is they don't believe in telling the future and prophecy, which for us as ministers in a denomination that deeply, deeply cherishes prophecy, I found that really that really grabbed my attention. I don't know about you guys, but that really kind of grabbed my attention. And then Sanderson, of course, introduces Vorenism after the Prelude, where we find out that Vorenism is hogwash. like in the Prelude, the heralds are literally saying, yeah, see the natives, they think we're divines. They don't have any idea. And we see them fall and betray their brother and mankind. And then the next thing people are talking about the heralds as if they are these legendary figures fighting in the tranquiline halls for all the Voren, for the Voren church. And so not only is it deeply integrated, but we also know from the very beginning that it is BS. So I'm interested for you guys to kind of flesh out a little bit your thoughts on Vorenism and the role it has in the story, and kind of what, as a palette to play with, what comes to mind for you.
I thought a little bit about you mentioned prophecy, how Vorenism kind of frowns on any type of fortune telling prophecy,
gambling,
precognitive type thing. Yeah. Well, yeah. That kind of stood out to me as well, but I think it seems like in the world that Sanderson has created, especially in Oathbringer, he makes this clear that the future is not fixed, because there are even Taravangian, who had been recording all of these death rattles, basically these prophecies, and he had the mind to be able to put the pieces of the puzzle together. He had this very thorough knowledge of the future, and yet even he was surprised. Even he was like, wait, that wasn't supposed to happen, Dalinar wasn't supposed to do this. And then you also have Renarin or Renarin, who was supposed to kill. We already said spoilers, but anyways.
Well, I wanted to
go ahead.
I actually wanted to push back on that point a little bit, Luke. Yeah. Dalinar, I would argue, did exactly what the prophecies suggested, because humans, spoilers, are the Voidbringers. He actually is the champion of the Voidbringers. I don't know about you, but he didn't side with Odium, but he was the champion of the Voidbringers because humans are the Voidbringers, right? Maybe I'm misreading that, but
that's interesting.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the problem of prophecy is that you can't really know the future. Right. It's so open to misinterpretation, right? And I think that's kind of what Sanderson is getting at, is, or at least that's kind of where Vorenism is coming from, I should say, is that you can't mess with the future, because if you try to this is what the prophecies mean, then you're going to end up, it's either going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, or you're going to end up misreading it so terribly that you're going to make things worse than they would have, So, and I think that we can do that as a church too. We've seen that, we've all been pastors, and we've all seen how people have taken prophecies and have, gone to some crazy places with them, thinking that God has spelled things out to us to a T, which he hasn't,
Yeah, I I definitely agree with you, Luke. Coming back to what your question, Brad, about my thoughts on Voyeurism when I first read it. Being from the UK, it reminded me a lot of old European Christianity, like whether it be the Church of England. I don't have a lot of experience with like the Lutheran Church, or within in Germany and Switzerland stuff. But these old churches that are like so embedded into the culture, but no one actually seemingly really practices the religion anymore, or like has the faith, but they have all of the kind of the rituals and all of the kind of just the culture around it. It reminded me a lot of that. And then and like the Ardent, how they have these beautiful temples and stuff which are mostly empty, and they kind of are in there doing their thing. And the average person, it's almost like either it's a culture or it's like a lucky charm thing, like burn a quick prayer or whatnot before a battle, and that's it. And for me, it just was like, I mean, and yes, your point is true, Brad. Like we kind of are shown in the beginning that basically it's all not true, but it feels like a very old church or a religious system that's been going for a while that has kind of lost its way. And now all it has are these like random rules that are incoherent, that don't always make sense, and no one knows why we're doing it anymore. Yeah. But like you were saying, Rob, it's just so expected of the characters. They don't even question it. They don't even think about it. They just kind of act that way. And as a minister, that it makes me sad in the sense that I don't know. I think there is so much passion. there is so much life that comes from believing something and knowing why, even if ultimately it turns out to not be completely true, but to actually be engaged in something rather than just simply going through a random set of motions because, well, that's just what we do here or in this church or in this country or whatever.
Well, and that's kind of. Well, I was just gonna go along with what you're saying, Jonathan. Is like Voyeurism plays a really interesting role because on one hand, like we know that the religious part of it isn't true in the story, but it's also deeply impactful. Like Adolin is an incredibly capable warrior and a champion duelist, which is really important for kind of where the story is headed. Because of his calling in Voyeurism, which by the way really got my mind whirling. Like I could be a pastor of sword dueling. That sounds fascinating. Like that's a class I would have enrolled in double quick. Totally different seminary experience. But like elements of Voyeurism are deeply important for the story. Like if Shallan can't hide things in her safe pouch, like where she's dead somewhere. And so it's like I found that really kind of an interesting like juxtaposition of like in some ways it's not really valid, and yet at the same time it is deeply influential in this in the story, the narrative.
This all tracks with what I believe to be Sanderson's kind of MO when it comes to his world creation and storytelling, which is that there aren't clear-cut right and wrongs, good guys and bad guys. This culture is good, that culture is bad, kind of the stuff. Like every life, every culture, every family, every belief system has its good points and its things that aren't great. And that, I think that comes through in the story, comes through really hard in book 3, at least to me, when you get to that kind of climactic moment of recognizing when they were translating the Dawn Chant, what it was actually saying. But yeah, that tracks with me, that's what he's doing. And I think he does a good job of that, of trying not to, I mean, at the beginning, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, well, these are the good guys and Parshendi the bad guys. I mean, we're going to go kill them because they're bad. and you even celebrate, like, for me, okay, I know we're talking about part one, which we're not. We're talking about everything I know, but we're supposed to be kind of staying at least somewhat grounded to part one. But for me, one of the best moments of this book, or any book that I ever read, is that moment towards the end of this book when Kaladin makes the decision to go rescue, or try to rescue Dalinar, right? In that battle. Like, the very moment he leaps across that chasm and recognizes, like, the stormlight in the gems in their beards and breathes it in, like, I have to put my book down and just, like, fist pump the air for a minute solid every time I read that, because it's so awesome. And yet that's a moment where I, like, as much as it's still such an awesome moment for Kaladin and for Dalinar and for the growth of them and everything like that, second time reading the book, well, especially after you have finished Oathbringer, going back and reading that again, it feels different, because you've started to not see the Parshendi as the villains at all, you know? And yet we are celebrating openly, and well should, this moment where our hero is leveling up in his ability to attack and kill them.
Yeah. So speaking of Kaladin as, like, the hero, I was really fascinated. I mean, every time, so this is my fourth read through right now, and every time I'm just more and more drawn to Kaladin's character, especially in part one. Sanderson, like, I don't know if he is someone who has himself struggled with depression, but, like, this guy understands depression on a whole nother level. Like, he understands depression in a way that, like, draws me in. So full disclosure, like, I'm someone who has wrestled with depression for most of my adult life. And so when I read Kaladin, it's incredibly relatable to me. And so I was fascinated this time as I was going through, seeing Syl's connection to Kaladin, and specifically connected to his depression. Like, it was interesting, Brad, you had mentioned how Syl was kind of drawn to Kaladin's brokenness. But like, this time when I was reading it, I noticed that, like, Syl was actually drawn to Kaladin's strength in a time of weakness, right? Because we find out that, like, the first time we actually see Syl is after Kaladin has become a slave, and he's already pretty depressed, right? You know, and whatnot. But we find out from her, she says, I've been watching you for a long time, and you haven't always been like this. So she actually, I think that she started watching Kaladin right after Tien died. And when Tien died, that was, like, such a pivotal moment in Kaladin's life, because he had a choice to make. Like, he could let that experience completely overwhelm him and take him out, or he could push back against it, and he could be someone better. And he becomes someone who basically becomes, like, the guardian of these young boys like Tien who are in the army, and he's their protector, you know. And so it seems like she's kind of drawn to him then. And so but it seems like she starts making herself visible to him when he begins to lose that, when he starts to crack, you know. Because, like, so this is what I found fascinating. I'm gonna kind of, like, go into, like, detail, like, teacher mode here, but, like, so I noticed the first time we actually see Syl is in chapter 2, right? Honor is dead. And I don't have page numbers because I'm reading it on Kindle, so it's, like, location 749, whatever that means. But so, like, we see, like, Kaladin is he's it's when he has the black bane, right? He's like hiding it in his belt, and he pulls it out and he's like holding it in his fingers.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to read like a little bit. It says, absently he took the leaves out and rubbed them between his forefinger and palm. They had to dry before reaching their potency. Why did he carry them? Did he mean to give them to Tvlakov and get revenge, or were they a contingency to be retained in case things got too bad, too unbearable? This is the first time we actually see suicidal ideation in Kaladin. And this is the first time that Syl appears to him, like immediately after having that thought. Just in the next paragraph, Syl appears, right? Oh, a soft feminine voice said, "What's that?" Right?
Yeah.
So that kind of caught my attention, that like the first time she appears to him is when he has a suicidal ideation and he's thinking about, am I going to use this poison to kill someone or to kill myself? But then like if you keep reading, you have like in chapter 6, bridge 4, you have that. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Brad?
No, keep going. I don't want to distract you.
Okay. So I just want to share like a couple more examples just to kind of like really paint the picture here. But like, so you also have this moment in chapter 6 where like Kaladin has basically given up, right? He's pushing on and he's just like, I can't do this anymore. He lets himself close his eyes. He passes out. And if he stays passed out, like he's going to be left on the battlefield and he's going to end up dead. Right. And so like Syl comes to him, right, to save him from that. And again, like we see that suicidal ideation, like he's not specifically talking about killing himself, but he's like, she's like, you know, they're going to leave you, get up, you'll die. And he says, I can't go back. Let me go. Right. Just let me have this. Let me die. And he even talks about later how if she hadn't like forced him to get up, he would have died, that she saved his life, you know? So there's that. And then, let's see, there's another place in the chapter Damnation, where, she comes to him, she says, Kaladin, Syl asks, floating down and landing on his leg, holding the girlish form with the long dress flowing into midst. Kaladin, you haven't spoken in days. He kept staring, slumped. There was a way out, right? So this is in his head now. There was a way out. Bridgemen could visit the chasm nearest the camp. There were rules forbidding it, but the sentries ignored them, etc., etc. And again, Syl is like trying to snap him out of his suicidal ideation, right? And then the final time in chapter 1, where she appears to him. By the way, so before I get to that, like there's a moment where new recruits are brought to Bridge 4 and Kaladin sees a young guy that he even, like for a moment, he thinks that it's Tien, right? And for a moment, he starts to think, I should protect this kid. But then he's like, what's the point? You know, he's going to die anyway. Everyone else in my life has died. Everyone else I've tried to protect. And he gives up. He basically says, that's not me. I'm not going to do that. And it's at that moment that Syl is like, I got to go. I can't watch this anymore. But she's obviously like, she's not talking about the war. She's talking about him. Like she can't watch him anymore. She can't watch him continue to lose himself. But anyways, then she like comes back, right? He finally goes down to the honor chasm. He even puts a foot over the void, right? He's about to jump in. And then who shows up? Syl comes flying toward him, right? With Blackbane, which is kind of a funny, like little nod to their first encounter. But like, it just fascinated me that like, she keeps showing up. Every time he has a suicidal ideation, every time he thinks like, I can't do this anymore, I got to give up, she shows up. Like she's like this, she's his savior basically in part 1. So anyways, I just wanted to like throw that out there. That's what like really stood out to me. And I don't know what you guys think about that, but like, I just, for Sanderson to paint such an accurate picture of what depression looks like, and then to pull that character out of that, like to me, like this is one of the best character developments,
Yeah.
this book with Kaladin, that I've ever read.
That reminds me. I'm sorry. No, I lost my train of thought, and I know you were working on something, Brad. So I can see the microphone.
Yeah, no, I mean, to go full kind of allegory, it's what you're pointing out. It makes it hard for me to sort of separate Spren as sort of standing in to a degree for the Holy Spirit in this story.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that like Spren are present, and in some forms they are visible to everybody, and in other forms they're only visible to a few, and there are some ways that are just like universally accepted, and in other ways it's sort of like, oh well, that only happens in in stories. And that idea of essentially Kaladin is having a deeply personal experience that literally no one else is experiencing alongside him through his ideations. Like no one else even sees Syl, which is one of the things he immediately tries to confirm when Syl shows up in the wagon. He's like, did you hear that? Yeah, it really kind of got me thinking about sort of like the work of the Holy Spirit, and kind of what you think about, like, do you feel like that is in some ways an accurate picture? I mean, obviously you shared off the top, like that's a deeply personal story for you. Like how do you feel like as a spiritual person and a believer, that depiction sort of crosses with a reality that you faced?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of times when I was reading through part one where that's exactly where my mind went, like Syl is like a metaphor for the Holy Spirit. Obviously, like you keep reading,
yeah,
and you find out that, like Syl has her flaws and stuff. And I think it's kind of like, Tolkien used to say this about his books. He was like, none of my characters are metaphors for anything. It's just a story. And there are definitely like parallels to, spiritual realities, but like, you can't say that, well, Frodo represents Jesus and Gandalf represents, whatever. And I think that Sanderson is like that too. I think we obviously see like his theology kind of influencing the way he builds the religion of, and the spirituality of the Cosmere. But like, I think there are moments when Syl, absolutely lines up with the Holy Spirit, and even if you're not like a religious person, like she definitely lines up with Kaladin's conscience. In fact, like there are places where like Sanderson is intentionally making Syl and Kaladin parallel beings. Like it's interesting how like he points out that Kaladin doesn't like being called Kaladin. He would rather go by Cal, and Sylfrena would rather go by the name Syl. You have like this moment where like Syl is like, hey, Kaladin. And he's like, what? How did you know my name? And she's like, I don't know. How do I know your name? Like, how do you know your name? And she's like, and he's like, well, because that's what my mom called me and stuff. And she's like, well, there you go. She's like very like intimately identifying herself with him, right? And so like she, at the very least, I think plays a role of the conscience, and you see that like conflict between Kaladin's thoughts, his depression, like his cognitive distortions, and her jumping in and saying, this is not who you are, Kaladin. I've seen who you really are. You're a hero. You're courageous. You're someone people look up to, So yeah, definitely.
I think just to jump on what Luke is saying, from a theological perspective, when we are introduced to the Holy Spirit in the New Testament, the Greek word used to describe the Holy Spirit is parakletos, which literally just means one who walks alongside. And I think certainly from that perspective, that is Syl's role. She walks alongside Kaladin throughout his entire journey. And they, as you say, they have this intimate bond and connection. I think, kind of, since we're kind of in this allegory mode, for me, there's the echo of, which kind of links, maybe ties back into the idea of brokenness, but the idea of, Paul talks about having a treasure in earthen vessels. And the idea being that the more broken the vessel, the more the treasure inside shines out. And Syl seems to see that in Kaladin. And I think most of the Spren, I could be wrong on one here or there, but that's kind of like the relationship that they have with those who will ultimately become Radiants.
Wendell, but
yeah, Wendell maybe not so much, but they see something of value. They're attracted to something that the characters don't necessarily see within themselves. And I think, the picture of God that I have is that, and to take it to the slightly next level, maybe, slightly bigger picture, ultimately you might argue they are attracted to pieces of God, as it were, or echoes of the nature of honor, maybe cultivation, that's in those people, which they themselves can't see. Kaladin cannot see how much like honor he is. To him, he's a failure. Which ultimately also echoes honor, because honor also failed. Honor also failed to be able to keep everyone, through the desolations, which I think Sanderson will, in book 4, maybe in further, we'll unpack that a bit more. But he doesn't see it in himself, but Syl sees it in him. And for me, there have been so many times when I have felt, I have needed the encouragement, and not that I have something on my shoulder, but sometimes it's through other people, sometimes it's through, different sources, but the encouragement from God to remind me of what he sees in me that I don't see in myself. And so I don't know if that's what Sanderson was intending with that character, but certainly I think there are echoes there that are, that do speak to that idea of the walking alongside ministry of the Spirit.
My goodness, this has really gotten me juiced over here. Like where the conversation has gone here. One of the things about Spren, or the thing that I think is like, what are Spren? Spren are, like the way it's described, at least in the story, Spren are the kind of like the personification of ideas or concepts or even things, that like when we give identity to something, even in our own minds, then in the cognitive realm, that thing would take on a form, like a sentience, so to speak, of itself. And so you have things like fear Spren that are, a result of the concept of fear. You have the, you have things that are tangible things, rot Spren and flame Spren and whatnot. And you have these other Spren that are like virtues, almost like honor or, and so, okay, so this, I'm gonna see if I can bring this together. Yeah. See if I can bring this together to what it's been leading me to. Each one of these characters has been broken in some significant way. And the thing that becomes their salvation and puts them together and makes them level up into what they ultimately should be is that brokenness being filled by this Spren, like this concept that comes back into them. So like for Kaladin, what kind of a Syl or a Spren is Syl? She's an honor Spren, right? And it's obviously she is not like, she comes to his rescue. Honor comes to his rescue at times when he's at the lowest places, and wants him, and she keeps pushing on him. Like there is this like obviously you get into book 2 and there's this huge push that she keeps putting on him to be like, I need you to do the honorable thing. When it comes to the decision that he's making with Elokar. So the Spren represents this ideal that really is the spiritual meat of what makes him into who he's needed to be. Whether it's a 1-for-1 for the Holy Spirit or for spiritual giftedness or whatever it is, it's like the part of you that you need to be who you are made to be, right? Which really ties into something that is another thing that I know the 4 of us have talked at length about, which is the concept of spiritual gifts and, biblically speaking, and how God made different people to function differently, like to how he made your heart to harmonize with just a part of his heart. That isn't the whole thing necessarily. And it's not like you don't need the other things, but there definitely is a sliver or a part of God's heart that I harmonize with and just really connect with on a level that is unique, maybe to just everybody, right? And this is at the biggest place. Like this is, to me, this is the greatest spiritual value that I've taken out of these books, is how it has the story has walked alongside of me in our own story that we have had with the discovery of who God made us to be. And I feel like each of us, in a sense, has a different Spren, a different spiritual reality that isn't necessarily there, doesn't have to be there, but like when we are broken and open, God, or like, infuses into us to grow us into the radiance that we were meant to be.
And what's powerful about that, Rob, and something that you said just really got to me, is that, is it possible that the thing that broke them is like, it broke that part of them, which, like you're saying, is then filled. So how is Kaladin broken? It's because of experiencing like absolute ultimate dishonor and betrayal, and not living up to the ideal. And so the thing that he then needs is honor.
Yes.
So it's not so much that he's this broken person, but he happens to have this one good bit on us, so we just build on that. It's like, no, in the actual area,
it's all together. It's the place of our pain.
Right.
Yeah.
Which obviously dovetails, hugely with the biblical side, and which is making me think now, and maybe this is taking it too far, but is it possible, if I reflect on my journey, that the gifting that I have is similar? Is there something that was broken in me in this area, which is why now I feel drawn to that part of who God is, and I feel most alive when ministering through that avenue of who God is to people? I don't know, that may be too much of a stretch, but
no, I feel like that's something that we need to have another hour-long conversation with off air.
that's almost a different podcast.
Stuff up. Yeah.
I love how I'll just kind of share this quote before we wrap it up here. But like, I love this at the end of chapter 11, after Kaladin like confronts Gaz, he's like, I died down at that chasm. Now you've got my vengeful spirit to deal with. And then he said, or he thinks to himself, Kaladin Stormblessed was dead, but Kaladin Bridgeman was of the same blood, a descendant with potential. Like he had to die. He did die at the honor chasm, and now he's new. He's ready to be reformed, shaped. Awesome language.
It is.
Guys, this was really,
wow.
really cool.
Well,
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It really was awesome. I look forward to diving next time into part 2, and we will finally start opening up who my favorite character is in the series, the one that I always feel like I just get the most out of and really love. So
are we going to do the interlude as well? Interludes in part 2?
Yeah, maybe we should just break each book into 5 parts, just to get through them and give ourselves a few weeks cushion, if not more, before we get to the release of book 4.
Right.
I feel like we did fine with this amount of time covering that much material.
Right.
So, I mean, we obviously didn't like recap everything, but
I don't
that's not
think
the
we
point of this.
recapped
Yeah.
anything, but that's
No.
all right.
No,
Whether
we're
or not-
definitely assuming that you've read all of this and
Right.
already been chewing on it. So yeah.
If you're still here and you haven't read the books, congratulations.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is,
So what I'm saying is, thanks, Mom. I appreciate your support.
dear.
Awesome. Hey, we'll catch
All right.
all you guys later.
Yeah.